Your meeting is live.
Welcome everyone to the meeting. I'm going to ask our Secretary Pam to please call the roll.
Thank you. Committee Chair Jappanen.
Present.
Regent Balducci. Absence is noted. Regent Wright.
Here.
And we're going to welcome Regent Juanita James, who will be joining this committee effective officially on Thursday. And she is with us today. Regent James, thank you. You have a quorum.
Thank you, Pam. I'd like to call for a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second? Second.
You can.
Okay, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. The agenda is adopted. Thank you. We have two discussion items on our agenda today, both presented by Lori Lamb, CSCU's new Interim Assistant Vice Chancellor for Human Resources and Labor Relations. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you.
Before we dive into discussion, I just want to reflect on your impressive HR background. Would you be willing to share today some insights into your experience or background in HR?
Absolutely. Thank you for that opportunity as well. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Let's see, I'll start in reverse chronological order, if that is okay. My most recent sort of official job working for a state university system was being the Vice Chancellor for Human Resources for the California State University system. Whether you know that system well or not, I think you do. You do, Regent Jappanen. That's the largest four-year university system in the nation. So that was quite an extensive portfolio. I oversaw labor relations, human resources, all the operational components of human resources across a system of 23 state universities. There were probably about 500,000 students, a couple 100,000 employees in different categories of different types. And much like here, I think 11 different collective bargaining agreements. So some significant experience there. Prior to that, I was at the University of Minnesota as the Director of HR Operations, overseeing all of the functional components of HR there. And just previous to that, I had been with the Minnesota State Colleges and Universities, which is a system of 7 state universities and 30 some odd community colleges, depending upon how you count them, with different presidents and different configurations throughout the years. But I had been the Vice Chancellor for Human Resources there as well. Prior to that, I'd worked in Washington State and had been the Assistant Vice President for Human Resources there. And previous to that, interestingly enough, I was an attorney with the Attorney General's office in the state of Washington, representing predominantly higher ed institutions in employment-related matter. After I left the California State Universities in 2016, I basically did consulting work, and some consulting work was involved in executive transition, helping individuals throughout all industries throughout the nation and frankly beyond, who are looking for their next opportunity, transition to different employments, getting them ready for doing so, and then also doing consulting through my own individual company, but also through the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, which is how I came to know the CSCU. I did some work at Central Connecticut State University, and then of course I did this review for the entire system. And so it sounds like a lot and it feels like a lot most days, but my background is quite extensive in higher education administration, having served in some of the larger systems within the nation. And I hope that that experience can help transform where you're at within the CSCU, and some of the results of my assessment we'll talk about next, I'm sure. But does that give you a good sense of my background?
Yes. Thank you so much, Lori. Thank you for sharing. The first item is a presentation on HR shared services. I believe you have a slide deck to share with us today.
I do, yes, and I'm going to hit share, and hopefully this shows up correct for you. Share, I gotta click the right one here. All right, it says I'm sharing. Can you all see that?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, great. Now I've got some strange stuff. It's telling me to rejoin the meeting, but I think I'll not do that. All right, so I'll start with this. This is the assessment report that I filed as a consultant. It was finished last December. I had been engaged in this work for about 6 months. The overview of the presentation is pretty clear, just to talk about the scope of work, what I did, big picture, positive indicators, and then some major issues and recommendations. The scope of work was really to review the human resource functions, to assess their structure, practices, and processes, to evaluate how they're working to meet the needs of the colleges and the CSU system. And we were going to identify opportunities for improvement, compare best industry practices, and recommend additional options and create a roadmap for future solutions. Additional things along the way were added to really think about an optimal state organization chart across human resources for including the state universities, CT State, Charter Oak, and the system office. And then also really diving deep into making recommendations related to the search process that we utilize in the system office, in CT State, and in Charter Oak. In terms of document review, I've listed a number of the documents I reviewed here. I also looked at a number of comparator institutions on best practices, and unfortunately, there's nothing exactly similar to try to gain a lot of best practices from. There's been some successes and some failures in higher education in implementing shared services, none of which were done in the scope and breadth of what was done here at the CSCU. I did talk to a lot of people along the way, all the system leadership, all of the CT State leadership, all the 12 CEOs at CT State, Charter Oak CEO, talked to the entire equity and civil rights team, the HR shared services team, all of them, some in groups, and some may have been absent and not necessarily available, but I talked to pretty much every one of them. Then I also talked to bargaining unit leaders, because it's always important to get their perspective on how things are going from their members' perspective. From a big picture standpoint, I thought it was important to point out that where we're headed is going to take transformational leadership from the chancellor and all of the executive staff. We really need to make a new model for human resources and labor relations, but that's going to require some major change. Everybody I talked to in the study, not one person said everything is great, we should leave it as is. Everybody recognized and sought need for change in the future. The sad, unfortunate reality is that the track record of implementing this kind of major change at the CSU was not good in terms of using good change management and implementation strategies. And we're going to all have to get on the same board, same page about where we're going to go, what we're going to do, and how we're going to get there, and go through some challenges and make sure that we know that we do that together. Lead by example, treat people fairly, and really pay attention to sound human resource and labor relations practices as we go through the process. I thought it was really worth noting that consultant reports like this can always be filled with the negative things. And so it was important to start with some positive characteristics. And there are truly, truly many dedicated executives who are committed to the mission of the CSU and to dealing with the multitude of challenges that are ahead, not just in HR, but beyond. There is dedicated leadership, many of whom are new, that are very desirous of change. They would not have probably engaged someone like me if they weren't interested in figuring out how to move forward productively. There's also a willingness on the part of all of these executives to evolve the system to a more mature operating model. It's a relatively new system, relatively young. There's still changes. The recent consolidation at CT State is still effectively underway. So there's a lot that's going on that have made so many changes and made it difficult to know where to move. Very importantly, I found many dedicated HR shared services employees who were trying under difficult circumstances to do the best that they could and very committed to moving forward. And there was a mindset that I found amongst almost everybody contacted that we can always do better. There's things that we need to do better. We know that, and we're willing to lean into that and make sure. So I wanted everybody just to know that focusing on all the problems, as will come forth, is really only part of the picture. Part of the picture is there is really a lot of good people here, leadership and otherwise, that want to move forward into a more productive model for everybody's benefit. So I made some major issues and recommendations, but I provided a little context for those major issues and recommendations. And I broke those into system issues and then talked also about HR shared services issues and some cultural issues that impacted my recommendations. At the system level, of course, there's been turnover in leadership. There's the series of mergers, as I already mentioned. It's been challenging with a series of murders and the mergers, no murders, thank you, a series of mergers and the turnover in leadership to really comprehensively define what is a system and what are the responsibilities a system office should do versus those that should be left to the campuses or to CT State. And as I said, the consolidation is still underway. And there were some political factors motivating the creation of shared services, which didn't always take into account the culture of higher ed, how we do it, things like shared governance and collective bargaining. Those things weren't always factored into the consideration. There also was real limited demonstrated knowledge about how to affect major change or how to implement them in a staged and effective method. There'd been some poor communication about what the future state was going to be, what major changes, when major changes were announced, it was often done without prior consultation or connecting with key individuals for a full understanding of the issues. We combine that then with the fact that we are in the state, the CSU is, as with many other higher education systems and institutions across the nation, in a true financial crisis. There's limited state funding, there are declines in enrollment, and the distributed model that the CSU does all across the state of Connecticut always presents some additional challenges. One challenge I felt was particularly prevalent was that all the compliance functions that normally are housed in one general area were spread throughout the system office. One thing I do know is HR needs a very close partner with compliance functions in order to be particularly effective. There are also other major challenges ongoing, whether it's shared services in IT and not enough bandwidth in some of the leadership. That's changing now. We're bringing on some really excellent, exceptional new leadership who can help manage some of this going forward. Within HRSS, the shared services, I described these sorts of leadership challenges that I found. Of course, there had been changes in leadership there. There had been 2 VPs of HR prior to the structure that existed last fall. When the VP of HR was ultimately eliminated, this function was moved to report to the CFO. There was a subsequent change in the CFO and a redefinition of the position of the VP of HR. All these leaders have had different perspectives and have changed the vision and implementation pattern many times, which has made it difficult to move in one direction. There just wasn't simply in my mind enough strategic thinking about what's functionally right for HR shared services or for the system. And a lot of the true subject matter experts within HR were not involved in discussions about the overall design or redesign, and this impacted their ability to respond and assist. There was also, in my mind, within HR shared services, a failure in shared governance responsibilities and collecting input from relevant stakeholders. They stood up HR shared services without appropriate planning and preliminary work around business process alignment, workflows, required support systems, and more. Any good major implementation like this always starts with the business process work, and then you create the structure around it. That hasn't been done and is still underway to date, which creates challenges. Employees were not given a voice from HR and only told that this is a new structure and that to apply for new jobs or they were going to be out of a job. We've had since then constant turnover and staffing issues. And most importantly, I think HR shared services became wholly transactional and worried about this HR shared services model rather than actively supporting and advocating for faculty and staff across the system. I also will note that there were times when all of this turnover and change led to some, I would say, bad advice from HR or from labor relations on where to go or what to do. In terms of cultural issues, and I don't think you can really look at major initiatives like this without really assessing the culture. There were things contributing really to the inability of HR shared services to function. And at the time, this was before some of the existing leadership, of course, but there'd been no concerted or visible effort by leadership to set the tone and expectations around the culture. Very few people at that time were seeing a system perspective or that we're all in this together. They were really in it for themselves. I saw efforts to gain power and control, etc. There'd been many instances of a lack of confidentiality on critical issues, even beyond personnel matters. And HR shared services was getting blamed for things that weren't really even within their purview, but because they were the processors of things, they were being held accountable for things that were beyond their control. And that was hampering their ability to be effective. There were instances of management by personality, again, some not very good HR practices being implemented. What I also saw, unfortunately, was an extensive amount of vitriol and I'll call unprofessional behavior toward HR shared services. Unfortunately, some of that continues today, and this is a cultural element that we need to change. And I really want to particularly thank Dr. Blanchard for helping really strongly change this culture towards HR shared services and beyond. I see him setting and leading by example in this area. But there was very little effort to be supportive in tough times. There are many unsatisfied employees in HR shared services. Many of the good ones have chosen to leave. And even within HR shared services, communication problems were abound and created silos. Again, most importantly, system employees, faculty, and staff don't see HR shared services or HR as a place to go for help. They feel they're on their own to solve problems. And some of these cultural deficits that I see really exist even at the campus level amongst faculty and staff who are feeling pretty disengaged across the system. As a result of all of this, I made some major recommendations that we are already beginning to implement, but that still need to have continued work. One was, of course, to develop a comprehensive communications plan. Again, I know that any good change management or implementation initiative has to be surrounded by good communications. And certainly this communication with the board, other communication places that we're going around, and I'm talking about my work as a consultant, are all part of that plan. We need a broader system organizational chart for HR and how that's going to function across the whole system. And we're developing that and implementing that now. We need buy-in by the leadership regarding a new model for how human resources and labor relations is going to be implemented across the system. We need to, in my estimation, we needed to reformulate the HR and labor relations leadership position and then begin a national search for the assistant vice chancellor of HR and labor relations. I'm now the interim in that role, but there will be a national search coming forward to find a permanent person in that role into the future. We also need to create a system office compliance unit to bring all the important compliance issues together so that they can have a real effective partnership with HR and beyond. There are other things that are really impacted by some of our compliance efforts not being coordinated. Now I'll move into some of the recommendations for HR shared services more specifically. I noted a lot of structural issues that were going on that impact the effectiveness. There hadn't been a good partnership between shared services and CT State, and there'd been a lack of communication and an ability for people to really talk with each other, figure out needs, and then respond to those needs. There really had not been a good partnership with equal opportunity and equity and civil rights in HR. These two are such important functions, but they need to actually operate hand in glove, and they were very separate and saw themselves as very separate with different goals and different objectives for the future. There'd been really a lack of collaboration and not a good partnership between human resources and labor relations. Again, I can't think of any two entities that need to work more closely with each other instead of seeing themselves as separate. There had also been a series of what I would call longstanding weaknesses in the staffing levels and skill sets within labor relations that was increasing over time and made that partnership very difficult. There were communication failures internally and externally. There was, as a result of COVID and beyond, and a result of this HR shared services model, there's an extensive amount of remote work happening, which is hindering some of the productivity. Siloed mentalities within HR shared services, creating centers of excellence that ended up not talking to each other and not really thinking about how we can jointly solve problems. And there was really an inability in the end to provide proactive human resource and labor relations services that would help management solve problems at the lowest possible levels. In addition, in terms of CT State, most of those campuses felt completely unsupported and they didn't know how to get help, and no one's present there to help them, and they didn't even know who they're supposed to call. There'd been significant turnover in personnel, losing institutional knowledge and really good people, and low staffing levels in some very key areas. There are some critical functions that have zero or minimal staff assigned, and we're already making steps along the way to improve those things. There's an immensely complicated hiring process that takes too long. We lose good candidates. We can't fill positions quickly enough to support the work that needs to be done, and this is a system-wide issue. HR shared service had become largely transactional and not proactive or supportive of management employees, as I mentioned before. They were overly structured, too many units, not talking to each other. And there are frankly some HR services that should be centralized and some that shouldn't. It needs to be set up so that the high touch services are closer to where they need to be delivered, and some of the more operational and transactional pieces can be economized for potential savings. So within HR shared services, I made some recommendations. Again, much like earlier on the system-wide concerns, to reformulate the leadership position in HR and labor relations, which is already underway. I said I am here in the interim role and we'll be doing a national search for a permanent position. I really think we need to get rid of the name HR shared services. I don't really know what that means. It's confusing. And it really is just the delivery of human resources and labor relations that we need to focus on. As I mentioned previously, we need to create that more comprehensive compliance function that incorporates those things and then can partner effectively, not only with HR, but beyond. We need to support CT State in hiring its inaugural Vice President of Human Resources to support their larger system office now and create some cohesion in HR practices across CT State and then in collaboration with the system office. And then we need to implement the revised organizational chart that we're working on and relocating some functions back to CT State and Charter Oak and adjust the functions in the compliance unit. There are some specific issues within each of the units within shared services. EEO is no longer within shared services, but parts of it should or shouldn't be, and we'll address that. In labor relations, there are recommendations, et cetera, in each one of the functional areas that HR shared services has. So I'll go through each of those. In EEO, as I said, it originally been in HR shared service, but then it moved to the CFO. We're now making adjustments in that as we go along. But there is an element of equal opportunity and affirmative action that must be in the system office and serve a system function. And we need to have some of that has a global look at EEO and affirmative action issues across the system. And I believe that should ultimately be housed within the system office compliance function. We are required by law to have an EEO affirmative action leader with a direct reporting connection to the chancellor. I will say that in this area, the second highest number of complaints or the second biggest pain point I uncovered related to our search process for hiring people, how long it is, how difficult it is, what is the right role for equal opportunity and affirmative action, and simply getting the work done. So we need to address that, and we need to really look at how we can move that process along, at the same time being very attentive to our equal opportunity and affirmative action commitments and our commitment to diversity. There's a balance that can be struck here that can hopefully make that process more effective. And then we should really, I think, move ADA accommodations to work more closely with our other leave management areas like workers' comp or FMLA, because they're always interconnected. Very seldom do you see one or the other. They're usually connected with all three of them. If it's an injury on the job, an injury out of work, whatever it is, all of these things are intimately connected, and right now they're being done by disparate groups. In labor relations last fall, there had been many departures of key staff in that area. There is the opportunity, I think, there is a committee that we should talk about whether it makes sense to have a collective bargaining agreement at the board level to get a higher level engagement in contract negotiations and a more strategic approach to how we manage the system's personnel and financial costs associated therewith. We need to reformulate and rebuild and reskill the director of labor relations position so that we can bring in some added skills and somebody who can really be a strong chief negotiator, strategist, and manager of the labor relations team. We have to really look at other staff positions. We've already done some of this, and some positions are now out for hiring and filling so that they can be more proactive problem solvers at the lowest level and really help managers and really help our HR people do good work from the beginning. In operations, which is really our payroll and data area, that this payroll is the #1 place we hear concerns about and getting payroll right. And I think we can all appreciate that if payroll's not right, pretty much anything else that HR does doesn't matter. We have to get paychecks correct for everybody. They need to continue working on building process flows and documentations and create a better staffing model that have a closer connections with our campuses and where the work is. We need a better method of tracking how we look at problems, and when problems arise, how are they getting solved? How long does it take to get solved? What are the trends and problems that we're seeing so that we could do additional training, etc. And we have to improve communication both into and out of payroll. And we need to make sure payroll gets the information they need to do their jobs, and that payroll goes out and talks and speaks and tells people what they can expect. We did retain an additional payroll consultant with Dr. Blanchard's assistance, who's really helping us take a deep dive in that area. She made initial recommendations. We've been following up on those, and some improvements are already underway. We have an interim leader in that space who's bringing project management expertise, and that is helping. But even though it's not working well, one of the reasons it's not working well is because all these transaction components are not in the same place. So it was my recommendation to move our benefits and retirement people into this area, as well as improve and hire somebody who really is doing a good job managing all of our different elements of leave. We've got to merge these all into one space for all the transactional components, and then develop very consistent business processes for each step in our record keeping. We need to coordinate that with our subject matter experts. And then the state of Connecticut is going to be doing an upgrade of, we call it CORE, but it's basically the PeopleSoft underlying system that we utilize. And we need to get ready for that and make sure that we're implementing that effectively, because there will be changes associated with that. We also need to work a little bit on better reporting and data integrity to make sure that we know the data says what it's supposed to say. We have only one person leading our benefits and retirement system for all of our employees in CT State, the system office, and Charter Oak. That to me is a major risk. God forbid she should go out on sick leave or have to go on vacation, because then we have nobody that can answer the questions and deal with the issues that arise there. So we're going to be adding a staff person in that area. We have a manager of leave position that's been vacant, and we need to fill that in order to better coordinate, as I said, workers' compensation, FMLA, and ADA accommodations, as well as other types of leaves that individuals have access to. Again, it's a major risk area for workers' compensation not to be adequately staffed. And we need to really be thoughtful about how we're managing all of this. And then at the end of the day, we really need to think hard and long about what things should be moved back to campuses. What are things that can best be done there more efficiently and effectively, and think about skill building in that area. In talent acquisition, this is really our recruiting process where we manage the search process. We need to reconfigure that process. As I said earlier, it's the second highest pain point uncovered in the study, and we need to really get clear about when we're doing searches, and if we're not doing searches, why we're not doing searches, make that process easier, quicker, and yet still never lose our focus on equal opportunity, affirmative action, and diversity. But it does require some better training, communication, and tools for individuals in order to be able to do that. We also need to change their focus from being purely transactional to being more strategic. What they do now is they just post on a few websites and hope that people apply. And I think we need to do more active sourcing of candidates. We know where people are. We can find them. We should go out and do some real recruiting. We should encourage more people who are involved in our search committees to do more recruiting, especially on the faculty side. They know where some of the good candidates are coming out of, what programs and other schools, etc. Most importantly, we need to focus less on the transactional mechanics of the process and more on empowering and training managers so that we really are getting better quality hires at the end of the day and people who are actually can be successful in the job when it comes. We need to get them in these seats quicker so that when we have work that needs to be done, it can be done well. We do oversee what we call the JAS HR, which is an applicant tracking system, and we need to be prepared and help the state universities utilize this. One is doing it now, and others are about to join us in utilizing this system so we have consistency and we can leverage our buying power instead of them going out and contracting with other vendors. And then we're looking at the staffing model in talent acquisition as well. We have a very small unit that was compensation, classification, and benefits. As I mentioned previously, we're going to move that benefits and retirement out into the operations area. And then with compensation and classification, we're going to combine that and start creating some more what I call proactive, positive issues around organizational development, employee development, professional development, training, improving our performance management systems, and going throughout the life cycle of an employee to better support them throughout the time that they are here. As I said, we're moving that benefits and retirement, and we're adding that one benefits assistant. And then finally, there's a unit called HR strategy, and this is basically the HR generalists or business partners, and they are here to serve the campuses and be that liaison and coordinator. There were many concerns raised that this model wasn't particularly working to serve our clients effectively. There's a lack of a consistent presence on the campuses. Campus and unit leadership perceived that they don't have a real point of contact or proactive assistance with some of their broader HR needs. There's been really inconsistent or ineffective training and cross-training. They haven't been working well with labor relations. And most importantly, I found it sad to hear that this group didn't feel like they were actually empowered to solve problems or work through issues and perform what I think is a true HR business partner model. There's not a lot of strategy development going on. And of course, this gets back to some of the leadership issues that I uncovered previously in the study. So the recommendations here were really, we're going to move these folks back to the campuses so they can build a better relationship and be a true business partner with the campuses. We need to really think about the staffing model, staffing levels, transitions of current staff, address the telework issue, develop a really comprehensive training program, a communication plan, and implement it appropriately. This all, of course, depends on CT State hiring its inaugural VP of HR so that they have somebody there to report to who can help coordinate those services more effectively. And then after that, we will merge our HR strategy and our compensation and all of those organizational development efforts into one so we can better serve employees overall. At the end of the day, we'll have 4 units in the HR space in the system office rather than 5. There will be some cost savings. There will be some efficiencies created by fewer lines, fewer silos being created. We will implement the organizational chart that seems to make better sense. We're going to improve our onboarding, training, and empowerment of our HR staff so that they have the tools they need to serve our clients better. And then prepare for the future state services that can be relocated to CT State or Charter Oak and serve those clients more effectively. Overall, conclusions from my report are these, that the most critical factor really to address throughout all of this was the leadership for human resources and labor relations. The creation of this assistant vice chancellor for human resources and labor relations role will help with that. This person needs to lead going forward, bringing all the stakeholders together and work with a continuous improvement model towards service delivery and change the culture so that it's much more impactful. I really did believe that if some of the leadership changes were not made, some of the other recommendations were not necessarily going to be done. Some things had been tried and they hadn't been successful because of a lack of appropriate leadership in the past. We're going to provide appropriate system level support functions around HR and labor relations and make sure that there's partnership between those functions like the compliance unit, like EEO. All of those things need to have really effective roles in place so that we can partner effectively with them. And then most importantly, we really need to change the perspective of HR to be an active supporter of management and employees. We need to train and empower and support management, and we need to increase our focus on overall employee success. That starts from classification and compensation and goes all the way into retirement. So those are the conclusions that I'd have. I'd really be happy now if you all have questions or thoughts about this. I'll actually take this down. I know it was provided to all of you, but I'll take it down so we can engage in a more efficient conversation. There we go. Questions, comments, thoughts?
Regent James?
Thank you so much, Lori. This is quite comprehensive. And I'd like your assessment in terms of how long it will take, because this is and how you would sequence these various recommendations.
So that's a very good question, Regent James. Thank you for that. When I did this initial assessment, I attached to it sort of a preliminary outline of that. Of course, things have changed already. Some things are underway. And so I'm working on an updated outline of timelines, expected things, etc. And I will be happy to produce that in the very near future for all of you. But it is a sequencing of matter. And my goal is to have something about what's going on in the first 6 months, what's going on in the first year, what's going on in the next couple of years, so that we can see some of that. But many things are underway or have been already accomplished, which we should take credit for. And many things are still to come. But I will definitely be preparing an updated list of the timeline.
And the second half of my question is, what is the board or this committee's role in this very significant transformation?
Another great question, Regent James. I hope that the board and this committee's role can be to be supportive, to be to understand the path and the future, and then as we bring issues before the board, to understand the context in which we're doing them, so that they can again be supportive of those things as we move forward. Most of these things are in the hands, most of the details of these things are in the hands of the executives, either in CT State in the system office or within HR and shared services. They're in those hands, but we really need, and as I said at the very beginning, we all have to collectively say, this is the direction we want to go. We have to be on board and all be positive supporters of the effort, even when it's going to be challenging. Sorry, little visitor over here. Other questions?
Thank you, Lori. I guess I have one question. Could you share the top 3 focuses that you would be prepared to focus on in the next couple months? What are your based off everything you've given us today?
Yeah, in summary, when I agreed to come into this interim role with Dr. Blanchard, 3 priorities were sort of talked about between us that relate to the study in a little bit of a higher level. And one was really working on improving our relationships with all of our bargaining unit leaders. There's been some fracture in that area in the past, and we need to work on that, and we already have. Another one was to really work on the professional development and support and overall organizational effectiveness work. But we want to make sure we're really looking at all of our employees and making sure they have everything that they need to be successful. And then the other was to continue to improve the organizational effectiveness of HR as a shared service model or as some direct service models. And so we're working on those. Those are the highest level goals. What I've been working on the detail level is really some of these key staff positions, some of these reorganizational structures, getting positions out there to be posted so that we can fill them with the right people that can deliver on the promise that we have of the future. And I think we all know that you can't do something like this without having the right people in place. And so in conjunction with Dr. Blanchard, we've been really focusing on making sure we're getting the right people in place, or at least starting to get the right people in place by evaluating positions, getting them posted, to getting them filled, etc. So we are going to need good folks around that can help implement all of these changes.
Thank you, Lori.
Can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I
Raise
ask
your
a
hand.
question?
Yep.
I apologize. My laptop died. I'm on my iPad and I don't know how to use anything on here in terms of raising my hand. So I apologize for just speaking up. But I was glad to hear that you're focusing on sort of getting the right talent in, and that there's a plan in place to address some of these issues. From what I've seen over the years, one of the biggest challenges is when there was a plan, and that there was sometimes a challenge to get people involved, in particular if they didn't agree with the direction of the plan. And which is, it's not uncommon when you're doing sort of a huge transformational project. But it is, if I think over the past years that I've been on the board, it's probably been the most significant challenge that the leadership at the time had to face. And I just wanted to hear your perspective on sort of the way that we're going to navigate through those challenges.
Thank you, Regent Wright. I mean, I think you've hit on one of the biggest challenges of any major implementation or change process everywhere is getting buy-in, right? So part of getting buy-in was during the process of the review that I conducted, is making sure I talked to all the right stakeholders and making sure that they're heard in the process. What I've been very heartened by is each group I've been talking to, even just this morning, I met with the CT State Cabinet and all of the CEOs and leaders from there. And even they said, thank you, because we finally feel heard. When I shared some of this with my HR shared services team with HR and labor relations, they said, thank you, because we finally feel heard. Part of it is getting people being heard in the process of the review itself. Then as I began to wrap up and feel like I was coming to some conclusions, I socialized those with all the key leaders before writing the report, because I'm not a consultant that thought writing a bunch of recommendations that they can't or won't or never will consider makes any sense, right? That just results in a report that gets put on a shelf. So we talk through the realities of these recommendations and how to implement them and what they mean. Then the report was done. And then now we're socializing the report and all of the findings with folks so that they know. I said up front in the report, and I mean it, we have to get buy-in and move forward. Does that mean everybody has to agree with every little thing? No, but we have to get that collective support. I've been spending an immense amount of time talking to all the leadership, trying to make sure they understand where we're trying to go, what we're trying to do, adjust as necessary with things, new things that come up, but to try to create that buy-in and get that group thinking about this, and frankly, group support for where we need to go. It's probably the single most difficult thing to get done, but I'm being very intentional about it. I'm very fortunate to have Dr. Blanchard, who's also very supportive and very vocal about it, as well as Chancellor Chang, who's very supportive and very vocal about it. I've met with only positive feedback, some of course trepidation about the hard work that's ahead, but everybody's feeling very positive about the fact that there is a roadmap for the future, and I intend to continue to leverage that. It's a hard thing to really say, because there's no one thing that you can do that can address that issue. But I believe if you're intentional about it, talking to people, socializing things, getting their buy-in individually and collectively, then we'll have a better likelihood of success. I hope that's getting at your question. I think you're on mute. I'm sorry.
Regent Wright, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Part of the challenge, I think, is that there are some decisions that have been made, and new direction that has been implemented that we've heard at various board meetings that aren't supported by at least certain populations in the organization. And so I appreciate that you've kind of sort of met with the different constituent groups to get them to, to listen to what they have to say. Yep. Because as a board, we're just, we're hearing the concerns, but it's only at the board meeting. And so I'm hoping that they view you as the person who is balanced and listening to all sides.
Yeah, and I thank you, Rita Wright. I really would say that that's one thing that HR actually needs to have as a reputation, is that we're actually here for everybody, right? And that hasn't been the case in the system. And so there are ways we're going to be intentionally working on changing that we've started very deliberately with some of these conversations, like, for example, with bargaining unit leaders. Does it mean they're not going to still do their job and once in a while throw some darts and flames at us? Of course not. But does it mean that we can actually try to solve some problems with them? Absolutely. And that's where we need to head.
Regent James?
I have a comment and a question. The comment is, laudatory congratulations on your approach and understanding of the importance of the change management piece. As I said when we were talking earlier, I led an HR transformation shared services initiative. And where the organization made its mistake was trying to save money by cutting back on the very important change management work that needed to be done, including taking the time to have those conversations and listening. And it is something that halfway through the process, people tend to get impatient and want to cut corners. So I commend you, and I just encourage you and us to stay the course in understanding that if you want, my mother used to say, if he who travels alone travels the fastest, but it's he who travels with others that travels the furthest. So we have to make sure that we continue to travel together on this and not get frustrated and try to rush the process or cut corners or cut costs if this is going to be successful, because I think the lack of that thoroughness and understanding of change management is what has gotten us as a system to this point now, where there is so much distrust and contention. And overcoming that, we've dug ourselves a pretty big hole that we have to dig ourselves out of before we even get to like ground zero in the level playing field. So, I encourage all of us to stay the course on this. My question is, given all of the now, current what's transpiring with respect to EEO and diversity, do we see our current practices or intended practices being derailed by some of what's happening in the larger universe of, sort of anti-DEI work?
Yeah, thank you, Regent James. It's I appreciate the comment, first of all, that you made up front. And I don't think I could have said it better than what you said. I think it was was it your mother that you said about he who travels with others travels the furthest. I'll remember that one, and I appreciate that greatly. On the DEI initiatives, I've had the benefit of also doing some work for some university systems down in Texas, where it's under direct assault and frankly attack, and they've had to go through the process of removing everything on their websites or every position title, and so I've seen the sort of scathing effect of some of the political climate issues facing higher ed. I think the good news in the state of Connecticut is there are actually state statutes, enabling and supporting the work that's being done in that regard here. So there's a state commitment to that doesn't exist in places like Texas or Florida otherwise. So there's a state commitment here. Is it a battle? Absolutely. But if we can communicate effectively about staying true to our mission, particularly the mission of a place like the CSCU that's here to serve exactly those students that they're trying to now sort of attack, the opportunity for those students and the support for those students, if we can stay true to our mission and the story that we have to tell about who our students are, how we serve them, and how they become the most productive members of society, are the drivers of economic reality for families, for businesses, and other things, then I think we can combat that. I haven't seen anything in the state of Connecticut yet that tells me we don't have the support for the work that we're doing, as long as we can continue to make the case for it, the business case for it. Why does it matter? And it matters, and it's exactly the reason the CSU is here, is to serve and support a population of students so that they can grow out into and become very effective and productive members of the work world and society in general. I think we'll be fine as long as we continue to tell that story. And Dr. Blanchard may want to weigh in here as well. But we have the best examples anywhere of how this work, the work that we do around DEI, all of that sort of stuff, how it actually propels individuals out into a successful life, how it transforms not only individual lives, but family lives and communities. I think if we stay true to our story, show it through examples, then we should be able to withstand some of the unfair criticism of the work in this area. I'm a firm believer. I believe that in my heart. I believe that, again, we need to have that lens for all the work that we do in HR. And I just think a place like the CSCU is the perfect case to make the perfect place to make the case for that kind of important work that needs to be done.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Next, we have some updates on HR information request. Lori?
Right. Yes, absolutely. Let me, once again, I want to share my screen with you. I appreciate very much that a week or so ago, Pam shared with me information from the HR committee, some follow-up information they would like to receive. I received that very positively and happily because it shows a level of engagement that I think is really important for the board. So what I've done is put together kind of, I'm hoping you can see that now. Can you see that now? Is that visible? Okay, got the thumbs up. Here were some of the requests. Here's the request as your information request. Here's some questions I have, and then here's some general information I have and potential actions we could take. And what I'm looking for, these are not issues to vote on. They're not issues today for us necessary to decide, but just some further direction and ways that I can follow up and be supportive to the committee. So your first information request related to obtaining market data on executive comp packages for chancellors, presidents, and the executive staff, such as provosts and CFOs. I assume that's at the campus. My questions were, do you want all compensation elements like housing, automobiles, et cetera? I assume you do, but I would want to make sure of that. How broad of the comparative groups do you want? Sometimes that's more challenging. For example, there really isn't nationwide a comparable president of consolidated community colleges. That's a very unique structure within the CSCU. There's also little data on what I would call system executives other than the system head, which is easy to gather some data, and then maybe how frequently. So a couple of things I would other share and then be open to hearing your thoughts on it was back in 2022, we did a very comprehensive market data analysis done by an outside consultant that was Siegel at the time. It was not necessarily for all positions, but key positions. And the results of that were presented to the HR committee back in June of 2022. That study cost us about $50,000. It's not one I would do every year. It's one of those that you do periodically, kind of looking at the market analysis. And I have some of the summaries of that if you're interested in seeing it. But they really did compare lots of our positions to outside markets and make sure that we were being competitive. That also helped to recreate our salary ranges so that we could make sure those salary ranges remain competitive. An option for moving forward would be, there are other consulting firms that really specialize in executive compensation. AGB Search is one of them that I've used in the past. They can do a real deep dive into some of this, but I can also tell you that it's probably upwards of $100,000 to get that done by an outside consulting group. The other option too would be for me and some of my staff to do more of an informal yet thorough review of various comparable and relevant institutions using Coupa data, and or the Chronicle of Higher Ed collects data on executive salaries and such. Probably only costs us about $1,500 to get access to some of the data. And obviously we would be reaching out beyond that data to specific institutions or otherwise as appropriate to help inform them. So I would love to hear your thoughts about the questions and about perhaps the direction that you might like us to proceed in.
I have a question. You said that there are no comparative organizations that have something similar to the Connecticut state. Is that because of the size? Because I thought, I mean, California is a huge system, and I know they have a consolidated system, and I thought Louisiana and Maryland, this is old information, it may not be accurate, but I just remember when there was this consideration for consolidating the system, there was discussions about other states that had done that. So that's what I'm trying to get a sense is because, is our size different, or?
No, it's because it's a relatively new trend. Thank you, Regent Wright. Sorry, I should have said that first. It's because it's a relatively new trend to go down that path, but Coupa doesn't collect data on that. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just difficult to get some of the data, but if we know where they're at and what systems are at, we can always contact them to obtain that information. You mentioned California, having been there. I can tell you that each of their institutions still has a president, as opposed to one president overall. There's a chancellor at the system level, much like what we have here in comparison to our state universities, but it's a little more challenging on the community college side because it's a new model moving toward that consolidation. In, for example, Minnesota, where I've been, they still have college presidents at each of the campuses. And so it isn't a consolidated community college model like what we have here. There are probably others out there. It's just not as easily identified where to go, but it's certainly doable.
Okay, thank you.
Any thoughts about how you might like us to proceed?
I would just suggest that just in my old world, sometimes there was never an exact comparative group, but compensation organizations that do that work typically will look at the scope of the job and try to find other positions with comparable scope. And then I think what we're looking for is a sense of, are we paying appropriately? It doesn't, you know, if when you do a compensation study, there's a range of pay. And, you know, how do we compare? Are we paying too much, too little? You know, the target is usually you want to pay at market, at the midpoint. And then you can make some distinctions in terms of lower or higher than the midpoint based on other factors. Maybe it's experience, capability, maybe it's the newness of the experience. So as an HR committee, we just want to make sure that people are being paid appropriately, and that the process of that, those decisions, I can only speak for myself, what is in our purview as an HR committee, and what is in the purview of the chancellor, and what's best practice. Okay, that makes sense.
Good. Yes, it does. Thank you.
I just want to add on to that, just looking at this, I was thinking more of an informal review. I don't know if anyone has any other thoughts on that.
I do.
Go ahead, Lloyd.
I don't mean to intrude in the trustee meeting. As it relates to the market data, I would recommend that we supplement the report that was done just a couple of years ago with this more cost-friendly approach using Coupa data. Coupa data will give you a range of salaries for different types of institutions, different size of institutions. It does not focus on system level. That's the sort of rub there. But my guess is a 2-year-old report is not so bad. We can easily escalate whatever number you want to escalate over 2 years at current inflation rates.
I would support Lloyd's approach to this, because I think that we are going to have a number of questions that we need to have answered, and many opportunities for expert help advice. And I think we're going to have to marshal those resources as effectively as possible. And if you had told me that the last market data was done in 2000, I'd have a different position in terms of how much we should invest in another outside consultant. But that number seems a little bit high, given all of the other things we want to do some research on.
Anything else before I move on to the next information? Because I hear you, and I frankly agree. I think there's good work that we can do internally and with Coupa and Chronicle data, and it'll supplement the larger study that we did in 2022. And I agree, we should do that larger study periodically, not every year, but periodically, to make sure that we're staying abreast with market data overall for all of our positions. Hearing none, I'll move on to the second of your requests, which was best practices in public higher education and systems for regent involvement in university president and key executive searches. And again, the question about the comparative groups is always there, but that's just a question. I can certainly do an informal review as well. It's easy there, but I also know, I just spoke to him last week, I also know that Terrence McTaggart, who you've been working with for your board retreat, actually is an expert in this area. And I do also know that he recently did a very comprehensive survey like this recently for the California State Universities. Terry is a fabulous expert in this area, as well as some others that I'll talk about later. But I think he could, in very short order, from an AGB level, credibility level perspective, give us some best practices in this area. He's been around a long time. He's studied it, and he could very easily do that. And I think, while I could do some of it, I also think he could do a very, very nice job of helping you understand what the best practices are nationwide for region involvement in these kinds of searches.
That sounds good, Lori. Lori, I'm wondering if you can also send this to us, and it's 1:39 right now. If we can kind of finish this up before 1:45,
Sure.
that would be great.
Oh, we'll do our best. So
Yep.
that sounds good. So on the next one was a formal process for the chancellor's performance review. Again, there are lots of options there, but Terry McTaggart wrote the book on behalf of AGB for how to do leadership evaluations, and I would recommend engaging him. I've done this in the past at the California State University in conjunction with AGB to develop a really comprehensive chancellor's evaluation process that is good for all. That would be my recommendation there. On the succession planning one, we can maybe talk about that in another time, or I could talk to you, Madam Chair, informally about succession planning and where you want to go on those. I will say, in terms of interim appointment guidelines, we're going to be addressing those as we look at the management confidential policy review that's coming up, hopefully June of this year, to have you all take a look at that. That is a board approved policy, so any changes there have to come to this board. And then The only other issue is the annual recurring items, and I'm going to meet with Pam and others and Dr. Blanchard and others to gather the list and be able to present that to you so you can help in establishment of your committee. But the two places I really would recommend that we use Terry McTaggart. I've spoken to him. He's a fantastic resource to help move our initiatives along, would be the best practices around searches and then the chancellor's evaluation process. Because of anything you're doing, the board wants to make sure and be doing that part well around the chancellor's evaluation. So with that, I'll open it up to any remaining questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Lori. This was great. I don't have any questions.
I don't either. I think that's a very practical approach and sound advice. So
Yes, thank you.
I agree. Thank you.
All right. Well, that concludes the items we have before us today. Thank you, Lori, again for the information and the updates. And thank you, Regents, for spending some of your Monday with us. There is certainly plenty of work on Lori's plate, and we look forward to hearing updates in the near future. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn our meeting.
So moved. Oh, you made a motion. I second.
Okay. Second. All in favor?
I
Aye. Opposed, abstaining? This meeting is adjourned. Everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
thank you very
Bye.
much. And thank you, Lori, for very, very informative work.
Happy to help. Thank you.
Yeah, it was amazing.